Okay, what did we go over last week? What's that, John? Hanukkah. We did. We went over Hanukkah last week. The Festival of Lights, the Festival of Dedication, and we talked for a long time about Hanukkah, and we only touched on the actual passage in John. We're going over John chapter 12, and if you remember, it was the passage where the Greeks had asked for an audience with Christ, and Andrew and Philip go to Christ and request the audience, and then Christ goes into this statement about that his soul is troubled, right, as he approaches the time when it comes for him to be crucified. And one of the things we talked about it in verse 28, it says, Father, glorify your name, and then a voice came out of heaven, I have glorified it and will glorify it again. And we talked about the fact that in worship needs to be in accordance with the will of God, right? So we talked about the fact that Christ is saying, Father, glorify your name. And we talked about that our worship of God is in obedience to Him. It is not in accordance, we don't glorify God and enjoy Him forever according to our own imagination. We don't worship Him the way that we think He should be worshipped. We worship Him the way that He instructs us or commands us to worship Him. And we talked about Cain giving worship to God in the way that he saw fit. We looked at the golden calf. We talked about the fact that Aaron's sons offered strange fire before the Lord. And the instructions for the temple were very, very specific, and the worship in the temple was very, very specific. And I thought it was really interesting this week that a young man was struggling with Christmas trees, right? And so the question was put forth to me that are Christmas trees okay for Christians to have in their home? And some of you might just go, yeah, of course they are, right? Because depth of processing is very minimal, right? You just don't think about it and it's fine. Right, but is that how we're instructed from Scripture to think about things? Or are we to ponder whether something is in accordance with the will of God, whether it's God honoring in what we do? Is it always our attitude towards it, though? Well, I would say that's very important. Okay, so, and I would completely agree, even good things can be not good when done with the wrong attitude, done in the wrong spirit. We would all agree with that. But can everything, if I have a great attitude about something that is incredibly and inherently sinful, does that make it good? If my conscience doesn't bother me about something, does that make it good? No, it doesn't. One of the things, there are some words that we want to use when we talk about this stuff. We want to talk about conquest. We want to talk about compromise. We want to talk about syncretism. And we want to talk about adiaphora. And you guys all know what those all mean, right? Yeah. Excellent. Okay. Well, there are lots of examples. This is not obviously a new thing that Christians have struggled with. When did the Christian church first start to struggle with stuff like this? From the very beginning. Meat sacrificed to idols. Right or wrong? What was the instruction of the Jerusalem Council, by the way? Oh, I get two people talking. Paula, you said? That wasn't the instruction of the Jerusalem Council. When the Gentiles came to salvation, that wasn't their instruction. What did you say, Mom?
If the attitude towards it is bothering you, don't eat it. If it doesn't, help yourself.
Yeah, you guys are coming from a later perspective, but what was the instructions of the Jerusalem Council? Hendrik? Strangled meat and meat sacrificed to idols. What's that? And blood. Right? So there was a prohibition given from the Jerusalem Council, do not eat meat sacrificed to idols. Right? That's what the Jerusalem Council said. And then Paul goes and says what? Sort of the opposite. Right? Right? He says, it's nothing. That meat is meat. Yeah. Right, so, again, we have a paradox. How can we reconcile these two things? The Jerusalem Council says categorically, okay, don't worry about all the dietary laws and everything, Gentiles. Don't worry about all the minute laws in the Old Testament, but we want you to do this. And one of the instructions they say is, one of the things that we don't want you to do is eat meat sacrificed to idols. And then Paul seems to turn that on its head. How can you reconcile these two paradoxes? This paradox.
Gentiles and Jews?
What?
Gentiles and Jews?
It would have been instructions all to the Gentiles, because the Jews obviously wouldn't have eaten meat sacrificed to idols. Okay, Hendrik, you go ahead. So you're saying that Paul's instructions were to a different situation than the Jerusalem Council's?
Kind of.
Different audience, maybe?
Different majority audience.
Different majority audience? Well, that's true. That's true. So we have to understand. We have to read into what we would think was the motivation. And if you think about it, it's really not that complicated to me anyway. I don't think so. The Jerusalem Council is giving instructions to brand spanking new believers, and they're dealing with a situation that is an acute situation. It's an immediate situation. We got to deal with this right now, right? Paul's instructions later on are to a more mature and developed church. So he's dealing with it from people who have been, since the church has developed and matured and had other instructions in the faith, then these Christians can deal with the issue in a more mature level than these brand new Christians. So if you say, go ahead and do any of this, then the brand new Christians are going to have their consciences, as it says later on, they are going to be super sensitive to the issue, and for them it's going to violate their conscience. For them it is going to be sin, because anything not prompted by your faith is sin. Right? So the Jerusalem Council is going, okay, don't do this. And the motive, most likely, behind what they're saying is that you don't have any teaching on this. There is no instruction on this that you've received. So to protect your conscience, don't do this. Okay? But Paul later on is saying, okay, you guys have to think through these things. And this is how you think through them. For those people whose consciences, who are just coming out of that, and their consciences are really, really sensitive, don't eat it. Right? Don't do anything that violates your conscience. That's not safe, right? Nor right. And then, but later on, when you mature in the faith and you understand more fully, then it's not going to violate your conscience. Your conscience is going to be educated, and therefore you can do that. So it's not actually a paradox. It's dealing with different situations. Right? Okay. What about Christmas trees? Are Christmas trees compromise? What is syncretism? Oh, yes, we can back up. It was the Jerusalem Council. I'm not sure I agree with you there, Guy, because we're talking about, well, the Gentiles have just come into the church. And so they're dealing with the Gentiles in the church, but it's the apostles and the elders of the Jerusalem church that are giving the instructions to the Gentiles on what things that they should be abstaining from and avoiding and what things they can participate in. So I think that their instruction to not eat meat sacrificed to idols is not for their own consciences, but for the consciences, I would say, of the Gentiles to whom they're instructing these things. But again, it's a descriptive text, so I am interpreting what I would see as consistent with Paul's later teaching. But back to syncretism. What is syncretism? Corey. Right, so you see a lot of meshing the worship of God, taking elements of, say, paganism, and combining it with elements of true worship of God, and thus polluting the true worship of God. So you saw that a lot in the Old Testament. You notice that the Israelites engaged in syncretism a lot. They saw the way in which the gods of the pagans were worshipped, Asherah poles and all sorts of other things, and they brought that stuff into the temple, and they brought that stuff into their worship of the one true and living God. And that is syncretism. And you see it still today in a lot of areas. Yes, sir. Oh, it can be anything. It can be any form of religion other than the religion that is prescribed by God. If you bring that form of worship in, and you see it, let's say Mexico has the Day of the Dead. They have, I can't remember, there's a worship of a particular deity. And it's paganism. It's just paganism put into Catholicism. That's all it is. And it's pretty transparent, and it's pretty evil, right? And so that is obviously not new, and it goes on today. And what is adiaphora? Matters of opinion. It's things that don't really have any great weight. What color is the carpet that you choose is an example of adiaphora, right? What cereal you chose to eat today would be an example, or whether you chose to eat cereal, would be an example of adiaphora, right? Whether you like Coke or Pepsi, adiaphora. Those things are really inconsequential. But you can make them consequential. And that is the problem, is that adiaphora stuff can be overwhelming. The Old Testament says, don't be so righteous and so destroy yourself. When you start to dissect everything you do to understand whether it's honoring to God and glorifying to God in its essence, then you start to get paralyzed. You can't do anything. For instance, if you go out and buy toothpaste, right? And do you think about the company that produces that toothpaste? Oh, there is no question about it. Because, and the reason why I bring up toothpaste is because, and now the name escapes me. It might have been Procter & Gamble. Yeah. And it was said to be a satanic company. And so there was a big thing on boycotting any product that they produced. Right? And you could do that with just about anything under the sun and go into the clothing that I'm wearing right now. Where was it produced? Probably China. Was it produced by fair labor? Was somebody enslaved so that I can wear these clothes? And how much should I investigate where my clothes come from? Now this is, you go, well, it's just foolishness. But this is something that Christians have wrestled with since the beginning, right? And since we have always tried to decide, and certainly if it violates your brother's conscience, then it becomes a really big issue for you. So when I'm given the question from a young man, should we have a Christmas tree? And I say, just have a Christmas tree, who cares? And it violates his conscience, is that a problem? Yeah, it's a problem. Because if he thinks that it's wrong and he has one anyway, then he thinks it's offensive to God and he just did it anyway. Is that a good thing? No, not at all. That's a very serious thing. And we should not be in that place where we ask people to violate their conscience. But we should be in that place where we seek to educate people's conscience. Okay, so to put your mind at rest about Christmas trees. What is the origin of Christmas trees? God created them. They're trees out of the forest. That's the big deal. There was one in the manger, yeah. Yeah, right behind Mary and Joseph, there was a big Christmas tree. But they didn't need lights because their radioactive glow, like you see in the pictures, lit the Christmas tree. So it was beautiful. The big dinner plates behind their heads. So what is the origin of Christmas trees? Yeah, Germans. It's true. Adventures in Odyssey. Very educational. Okay, so there are some people, we are not going to get to the lesson today. Not at all. It's okay. This is like the second week in a row. So anyways, a lot of people will point to the use of trees and branches and all this stuff in pagan worship. And yes, that's true. Trees and branches have been used, oaks and Asherah poles and all sorts of stuff have been used in pagan worship for quite some time. Probably as long as people and trees have interacted with each other, right? But does that mean that palm branches are pagan? Yes, they are, right? The first Christmas trees were actually from Germany, and they were by Christians, right? You can talk about branches, you can talk about all sorts of stuff, but documented evidence for use of Christmas trees was from Germany, and it was by Christians. So anybody who tells you that Christmas trees are pagan, they are not historically accurate. That doesn't mean all Christmas trees are great, but that does mean that the origin of Christmas trees is fine. The first person to put lights on a Christmas tree burned the house down because they were originally candles. Right. But credited with putting the first candles on a Christmas tree was none other than Martin Luther. Martin Luther is credited as the first person to put candles on a Christmas tree. Why, I have no idea. Yeah. Yes, I guess that's true. Although candles in a house and all that were, not uncommon. Okay, so that was obviously in the 16th century. Christmas trees did not catch on, really, till the widespread acknowledgement of Christmas trees and the use of Christmas trees didn't happen until the 1800s. Yes, sir?
Maybe a quick fun fact. I'm guessing it's a legend about Owen because so many things are legend. Also, has had to include in the Holy Spirit talked to him about Romans 3 for, shall grace through faith while he was sitting on the toilet.
Okay, that's an interesting. I'm not going to repeat that for the camera. Okay. All right. Moving past that. Who was the first person to put electric lights on a Christmas tree? Thomas Edison. Yeah, that guy. Okay, and does anybody, I'm sure that lots of you know that Boston gets a Christmas tree from Nova Scotia every year, right? So it's shipped down to Boston. How many of you know what the origin of that tradition is? My mom does. Go ahead.
The fires in Halifax and the ships screwed out in Halifax.
That's exactly it.
Boston sent a lot of people to help.
Yes. So in honor of the help sent from Boston, because of the Halifax explosion, Nova Scotia sends a Christmas tree. I thought that was pretty cool. Anything else? Oh, for you environmentalists, 1 acre of Christmas trees provides the daily oxygen requirement for 18 people. So isn't that, I'm sure you feel better about your Christmas tree now. Most of the Christmas trees are obviously farmed or wild. Farmed, obviously. And so Christmas trees are environmentally friendly, much more environmentally friendly than plastic imitation Christmas trees. Yeah. They are, you hug a Christmas tree, man. It's a wonderful thing. Okay. Do I have any other, no, there is nothing really that I thought was incredibly interesting in the Christmas tree trivia. If any of you have interesting Christmas tree trivia, feel free. What about the star? Don't you have an angel? Pagan. You know, when I say angel, I mean winged girl, which that's a whole different discussion. Okay. Oh, no, we're not getting into Santa Claus or mistletoe or many, because we would be here till Christmas if we went over all of the various things attached to Christmas. Some of which might strain your conscience and your understanding more than others. But Christmas trees are okay. So you can have a Christmas tree in good conscience now. Unless it goes against your conscience. But you should educate your conscience, yes?
My question to Marilyn is, how long does it take her to decorate?
Okay, so obsession about ornaments is also a different issue. And
2.5 hours. But see, I'm moving around some to a little bit.
Each one measured to be equidistant from every other. Okay, so there. That was our huge segue. And now for 15 minutes, we'll actually get into the lesson. For 10 minutes, we'll... Okay, so John chapter 12, 27 to 36. We'll read it, and that'll take up 5 minutes. So, now my soul has become troubled. What shall I say? Father, save me from this hour. But for this purpose I came to this hour. Father, glorify your name. Then a voice came out of heaven. I have both glorified it and will glorify it again. So the crowd of people who stood by and heard it were saying that it thundered. Others were saying, an angel has spoken to him. Jesus answered and said, this voice has not come for my sake, but for your sake. Now judgment is upon this world. Now the ruler of this world will be cast out. And if I am lifted up from the earth, I will draw all men to myself. But he was saying this to indicate the kind of death by which he was to die. The crowds then answered him, we have heard out of the law that the Christ is to reign forever. How can you say the Son of Man must be lifted up? Who is this Son of Man? So Jesus said to them, for a little while longer, the light is among you. Walk while you have the light, so that darkness will not overtake you. He who walks in darkness does not know where he goes. While you have the light, believe in the light, so that you may become sons of light. These things Jesus spoke, and he went away and hid himself from them. Okay, so it says, and I, if I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all men to myself. Now, if I am lifted up from the earth, John makes a point there of pointing to, was saying this to indicate by what kind of death he was to die. And then it goes on in verse 34, the crowd then answer, we have heard out of the law that the Christ has remained forever. How can you say the Son of Man must be lifted up? Who is this Son of Man? Now, most of the commentators that I read made the connection between what Christ said, if I am lifted up, and what the crowd says around him, which is, we have heard in the law that Christ remains forever. How can you say the Son of Man must be lifted up? My question to you is did the crowds understand that Jesus was talking about crucifixion? What? Should they is different than did they. They obviously should have, because as Christ talks about on the road to Emmaus, that it was clear from the Old Testament that the Christ had to suffer and die. That was clear. And Christ himself had been teaching that he was going to die, right? So the crowds should have understood. But John says, he was saying this to indicate by what kind of death he was to die. The indication from John is, here and in other places, is that even though he was plain, speaking about his death and even about crucifixion, it was hidden from the eyes of the people, even the disciples. It was hidden from their eyes. What might the crowds have thought when he said, lift it up? What was that? Exalted is a possibility. That seems to me that seemed to me that either one could be true, and both might be true, right? Some might have thought that he was talking about being exalted, that he was going to receive the kingship, and therefore he was going to be lifted up, glorified before the people. But he has talked about going to the Father, right, and going where they could not follow, and that. So it seemed to me more that this was in the spirit of Enoch and Elijah, that he was going to be taken up into heaven, away from them, where they couldn't follow. And so they're putting the theological question to him, obviously. The Old Testament says that the Messiah remains forever, which it does. Right? And you say that this Son of Man, now he doesn't say Son of Man here, but that would be part of his greater teaching. Who is this Son of Man? If he's going to be lifted up, if he's going to leave, then who is he? Because the law says that he's going to remain. Does Jesus directly answer their question? He always answers the question. He does not always answer the question with a straightforward yes, no, here's the explanation kind of thing, does he? Because his next statement is, so Jesus said to them in response to this question, for a little while longer the light's among you, walk while you have the light, so that darkness will not overtake you. He who walks in the darkness does not know where he's going. While you have the light, believe in the light, so that you will become sons of light. Right? So, does that sound like an answer to the question? No, obviously not. But is it an answer to the question? Of course it is, right? It is that while I am here, the important thing is your belief in me. That I am the light of the world. He's taught that repeatedly. I am the light of the world. You need to put your faith in me and walk while you have the light so that the darkness will not overtake you. And if you believe in the light, you will become sons of the light. Now, yes, sir. Yeah, I think that that there's a simultaneous truth here in that they are right. the Messiah does remain forever in the understanding that his kingdom comes, right? So Jesus comes the first time, and he is King of Kings, and he overcomes. He is the conqueror who establishes his kingdom. And his kingdom, as the Old Testament says, is forevermore, right? His kingdom has no end. That is the prophecies that are made in the Old Testament. And he will reign forever and ever, right? So the Messiah comes, and the Messiah is the king. He is the anointed one. And he establishes his kingdom, which Christ does, right? So in that respect, that is the fulfillment of the Old Testament. But Christ has been saying from the start that he is not staying, right? That he gives a parable about the king that goes away to receive his crown. And he leaves his servants in charge, right? And this is a prophecy that he will go away, and then he will be crowned King of Kings and Lord of Lords and return, right? And to establish his kingdom. But the kingdom is already won. The kingdom is already established at his first coming. Any questions? Comments? Complaints? Okay, so we talked about this before too. Yes, sir. You do have a. Well, why didn't you? And that is true. You could say that Christ has never left because we are his body, and he always remains, right? We have the spirit and mind of Christ, and he is always with us, and he will never leave us or forsake us. So certainly in that sense, he has never left, ever, right? So this is that even though he departs physically into heaven and sits at the right hand of the Father, he has never actually left his people, right? So he is always spiritually present in the lives of believers. So the Messiah does remain forever in that respect. So in terms of the light, we know that he is the light of the world. 2 Corinthians 4. We're out of time. We'll go over the light next week. Okay, and I haven't decided whether I want to do any Christmas trivia next week or not, so we might not have much of the passage next week either. Okay, thank you.